Hello friends and welcome to the how-to series. In this video we will be covering Ninja, which is a highly supportive melee DPS bringing everyone else's damage up along with its own. We will cover every single ability Ninja has at its disposal and how to fully utilize them. We will go into an opener and rotation portion of the video. We will go into the stat priority of Ninja, and we'll finish up with some closing thoughts. So with all that said and done, let's just get right into it. Let's begin with Ninja's core mechanics, which is Ninjutsu and the Ninki gauge. So let's start with Ninjutsu. Just a few things before we get into the nitty-gritty bits of Ninjutsu. To begin with, Ninjutsu is tied to the GCD, the global cooldown, so you do not need to worry about clipping into your global cooldown when using your Ninjutsu. Additionally, never catch yourself using off global cooldowns during your combination of ninjutsus. If you were to use an off global cooldown in between your combinations, this will result in a bad combination, which results in a bunny, which results in a completely wasted ninjutsu, and you do not want that. Let's go into the actual symbols and ninjutsus themselves slow to make more sense of this. So once we get to level 30, 35, and 45, we get access to 10 chi and jin respectively. All of these can be combined to create unique combinations of ninjutsus, but if you were to press the same ninjutsu twice, this will also result in a bunny, so do be aware not to do that. Let's go into the actual ninjutsus and the combinations themselves though. If you were to press any singular ninjutsu, you would gain access to Fuma Shuriken. We're only going to be using this at level 30 to 35. Once we get to level 35 low, we get access to Katon and Raiton. Katon is a combination of chi to 10 or jin to 10. Raiton is a combination of 10 to G or Jin to Chi. Katon is our AoE and Raiton is our single target. We will be using Katon on 2+ targets until level 90. Once we get to level 90 low, we will always be using Raiton on 2 or less targets. But until we're level 90, we are safe to use Katon on 2+ targets. Once we get our last symbol, which is Jin, we get access to Hyuton, Huton, Doton, and Suton. Let's go over each of these individually. Hyuton is in a combination of 10 to Jin or chi to jin. Hyuton is pretty useless at low level. You might get a use out of this when you're doing solo content because it's going to bind the target. Other than that, the potency is not worth it until a higher level, which we will go into. Huton is a combination of jin to chi to 10 or chi to jin to 10. This is a buff that we apply to ourselves that reduces our weapon skill recast time and auto attack delay by 15%. This buff is essential to keep up at all times. It will last you a total of 60 seconds, and there is ways to keep this buff up via weapon skills, and we will go into that after we have gone through Ninjutsu and the Ninki gauge. But for now, just keep in mind the importance of Huton. Next, we have Doton, which is a combination of 10 Jin Chi or Jin 10 Chi. This is a ground AoE, and you should be using this on 3+ targets. And finally, we have Suton, which is a combination of 10 Chi Jin or Chi 10 Jin. This is going to allow us to use Trick Attack without having to hide. We will go into Trick Attack and hide in a moment though, but do note that this ability is extremely important to use when Trick Attack is coming off cooldown for our own personal DPS. There's a few more ninjutsu to go over, but let me quickly give you a disclaimer here. That might sound incredibly overwhelming to you. All those combinations of ninjutsu, you might wonder, how are you going to remember all of that? Do not fret, this is going to become muscle memory to you. I do not even remember the combinations of buttons I pressed. All I remember is the hotbar combination that I press on my keybinds. That's all I remember. I don't remember what even ninjutsu I'm pressing other than the combinations on my keybinds. So I know when I've pressed a certain combination and what that combination will result in. So this is all down to muscle memory. Don't try and think that you have to remember all that. You really don't. Just practice, build in a little bit of muscle memory on your ninja and you'll be absolutely fine. Do not worry about it. You can copy my keybinds if you would like. That's how I've set up my ninjutsu, and this has a good consistency with the certain combinations that I like to do. So if that's something you want to do, feel free to do that, but trust me, it isn't as overwhelming as it seems. Anyway, there's 2 more ninjutsus to go over, but let's go over Kusatsu because it ties those 2 ninjutsus so well together. So Kusatsu is on a 60-second cooldown. It's going to allow you the execution of a ninjutsu without consuming any of your ninjutsu charges. charges, which, by the way, Ninjutsu has 2 charges, so do keep that in mind. It's going to increase the damage for the next Ninjutsu action by 30%, and this should be used on Raiton or Katon pretty much exclusively until level 76. Once we get to level 76 low, this all changes because we get access to Goka Meikyaku and Hyosho Ranyu. As a side note, these 2 ninjutsu can only be used under the effect of Kusatsu. So when Kusatsu isn't up, we will not have access to these 2 ninjutsus. Goka Meikyaku is just Katon, but improved, so it's the same combination that you would always press when it comes to Katon, and you'd use this on 3+ targets. Hyosho Ranyu, on the other hand, is our single target alternative, but this isn't the same combination as Raiton, for example. This is actually the same combination as Hyoton. So this is either a Chi to Jin or a Ten to Jin. This does extremely high potency, and when it comes to a single target instance, we do not want to miss out on this potency. We do not want to accidentally press Raiton instead of doing our Hyoton here, because as you can see, this turns into Hyoton and it does extremely high damage. So do make sure that when you use Kusatsu and you are in a single target instance, make sure that you're building it into your brain to use Hyoton at that point instead of Raiton. Before we move on, let's tie this all together with Hide. When we use Hide, it's going to dispel any Doton that we have left on the field, and on top of this, it's going to reset the cooldown of our Mudras or Ninjutsus back to 2 charges. This is really nifty in between dungeon pulls and also preparing ourselves for a boss fight in a raid or trial instance. On the topic of Ninjutsu, we may as well look at Tenchi Jin, which is an ability of itself. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, and it's going to convert our symbols or Mudras into Ninjutsu themselves. When it comes to a single target instance, we should go from Ten to Chi to Jin. This will result in a Fuma to Raiton to Suton. When we do an AoE situation, we should go from Jin to Ten to Chi. This will do a Fuma into Katon into Doton. We should do this in a 3+ target instance. Next, let's go into Meisui because it just ties into Tenchi Jin so well. When we're in a single target instance and we go Tenchi Jin and our final ninjutsu is a Suton, we will use Meisu, which will convert that Suton into 50 Ninki gauge. Additionally, it's going to increase our Bavakakra potency to 500, which is a big chunk of potency which you really don't want to miss out on when it comes to a single target or 2 target instance. All right, well, that was a lot, but hopefully you can keep that information in, and just remember, build muscle memory with those combinations and you'll be absolutely fine. Let's go into the Ninki gauge now. The Ninki gauge holds up to a total of 100 of Ninki, and we generate the Ninki gauge through our basic GCD actions, which do not include Ninjutsu. Now, every single action increases the Ninki gauge by various amounts. I'm not going to go through every single various amount of the Ninki gauge bit by bit, but just keep in mind that when you're level 62, every single one of your standard GCDs is going to increase your Ninki gauge by 5. Once you get to level 78, on the other hand, every single standard GCD action is going to increase your Ninki gauge by 5, except Alonian Edge and Armor Crush, which are going to increase that Ninki gauge by 10. Then, once you get to level 84, Alonian Edge and Armor Crush is then going to increase your Ninki gauge by 15 instead. The Ninki gauge grants you access to Hellfrog Medium, Bavakakra, and Bunshin. These all cost 50 of the Ninki gauge, respectively. Hellfrog Medium is an off-global cooldown AoE and should only be used on 3+ targets. Bavakakra is a single target and should be used when there are 2 or less targets. And Bunshin is a damage increasing buff which we put on ourselves. It grants us 5 stacks of Bunshin, and for each GCD that we use in Bunshin, it's going to add various potencies depending on the type of action. For instance, as you can see, it will add 160 potency to a melee or ranged attack, and it will add 80 potency to an AoE attack. This is on a 90-second cooldown, and you do ideally want to be using this the moment it comes off cooldown. Additionally, when you use Bunshin, the same button of Bushin is going to turn into Phantom Kamaitachi, and this is a ranged attack, and it's going to stay on you for 45 seconds. Now, this is very important because this means you do not need to use Phantom Kamaitachi immediately upon using Bunshin. The problem with Bunshin is it's on a 90-second cooldown. This does not align with Ninja's other cooldowns, which we will go into. Due to this reason, we can actually hold on to Phantom Kamaitachi to line up with our other cooldowns. That said, if we have to disengage from a boss for any reason, we should be using Phantom Kamaitachi during that disengage, because this attack is actually a ranged attack with a range of 20 yards. So if we do have to disengage from the boss for any reason, we should be then using our Phantom Kamaitachi, as it's going to keep our uptime rolling and our GCD rolling. On the topic of downtime and disengaging, if you know you have to disengage from a boss and you do not have a Phantom Kamaitachi up, but your ninjutsu is coming up, then you should be holding on to that ninjutsu for a moment, as ninjutsu is on 2 charges, and holding on to ninjutsu for just a few seconds isn't going to hurt you whatsoever. So if you do have to disengage and you do not have a Phantom Kamaitachi up, then using a Right-On or a Suit-On if your trick attack is nearing its cooldown is also a great alternative when disengaging from the boss. For instance, if you have to disengage from the boss for a longer period of time, then using a Phantom Kamaitachi and then into a Suit-On or a Right-On is going to keep you 2 GCDs rolling, as well as being disengaged from the boss. So all you're missing out here is auto attacks, which isn't as big as missing out on your GCDs. This gives Ninja a lot of flexibility when it comes to disengaging from bosses, because it can still keep its uptime rolling, which is incredibly valuable for the versatility of Ninja. Now we've talked about all the slightly complicated stuff, the ninjutsu gauge, the Ninki gauge. Let's move on to the simpler stuff, like all the basic GCDs and a few of Ninja's utility actions as well. So to start off with, we have Ninja's basic 1-2-3 combo, which is Spinning Edge into Gust Slash into Alonian Edge. Alonian Edge should be used at the target's rear for increased potency. Once we get to level 54, we gain access to Armor Crush, which is our first single target ability to keep Huton up. This should be used at the target's flank for increased potency. When we use this ability, like I mentioned, it's going to increase our Huton duration by 30 seconds to a maximum of 60 seconds. So when your Huton is under 30 seconds, you should be aiming to use Armor Crush. Unless you are in buffs and you want to get those last Alonian edges off, then you can delay Armor Crush, but make sure not to let Huton drop, as that can result in a damage loss. One more thing to note, and it's very niche, but if you catch yourself in a situation where you can only get a flank attack and you do not have any true north charges off cooldown, and your Huton is above 30 or even higher, and it would potentially be a waste to use an Armor Crush over an Alonian Edge, but you cannot physically get to the rear to do an Alonian Edge, then it is more worth to use that Armor Crush over missing the positional on Alonian Edge, as that is more potency overall. So just a little decision that you can make if you want to really min-max your gameplay in those sort of scenarios. Once we get to level 60, we get Hero Legend, and this is a single target attack. It isn't a combo action or anything, it's just a individual attack. It's not going to break combo if we used it, and this is straight up just going to grant Huton to ourselves for a entire 60 seconds. So in an ideal world, this ability would never be used, but that does not make it useless. This is actually a really handy ability. If you were to die and be resurrected, you would use this ability to get your Huton back rather than manually casting it with your ninjutsu. If you are in downtime and using a Huton is going to take away a Right-On when the boss becomes targetable again, then you would most likely use a Harujan instead to still get those 2 ninjutsus off. So it has quite a bit of use to it, and it definitely isn't useless. Just in an ideal world, you wouldn't use it, but not every encounter is going to be ideal. I see a lot of ninjas actually use this ability in the newest Ultimate, actually. So it does have a lot of value, and it is a massive quality of life button. So do not disregard this ability. Moving on. Next, we have our AoE combo, which is Death Blossom into Haku Mujin Satsu, and this should be used on 3+ targets. Haki Minjinsu Satsu is going to increase our Huton duration by 10 seconds, so we don't have to worry about reapplying Huton in an AoE situation. Finally, we have our last GCD action, which is Throwing Dagger. This is a ranged attack, and this is honestly our last alternative to a ranged ability. We will be using Throwing Dagger if one or two things. We do not have a Phantom Kamaitachi or a Right-On or Suit-On at the ready. If we do not have either of those things, we will opt in to use a Throwing Dagger when we have to disengage from a boss. Otherwise, do make sure to prioritize using your Raiton, Suton, or Phantom Kamatachi. Next, let's go into the utility and a few damaging off global cooldowns that Ninja has access to. First, we have Mug, which is on a 2-minute cooldown. This is going to increase the target's damage taken by 5% for 20 seconds, and on top of that, it's going to increase your Ninki gauge by 40. It is highly imperative that you use this ability on cooldown in most situations. Your party members, for the most part, are going to be relying on you to use this on demand and on cooldown. Of course, if you know the boss is going to disengage you or become untargetable in the next 5 seconds and your Mug just came off cooldown, then maybe hold it until the boss comes back. But that is something that you will probably discuss with your raid members, and every single raid member is going to delay their raid buffs at that point anyway. Next, we have Trick Attack, and this is actually a personal buff to the ninja, but it isn't a buff, it's a debuff to the enemy. This is going to increase the damage the target takes by 10% from you only, and it's going to last 15 seconds. This should be executed from the target's rear for increased potency. Now, the only way to use this is quote unquote being hidden, but that's where Suton comes in. When you use Suton, you actually get a buff which allows you to execute Trick Attack. On top of that, you can also consume that buff with Miyasu, but of course you should prioritize your Trick Attack. So what you do here is you will manually cast Suton to do your Trick Attack when you see that your Trick Attack is coming up in the next 20 seconds, and you will use Miyasu with Tenchi Jin. So do not worry about using Miyasu over Trick Attack. Trick Attack is more important. You'll manually get your Suton up to use Trick Attack, and your Miyasu, because it's on a 2-minute cooldown along with Tenchi Jin, you'll just combine those two and it will kind of just fall into place and make sense. So Trick Attack, it's highly important that you also are getting this off cooldown for your own personal damage. So do make sure to keep an eye on this on your hotbar when it is about 20 or so seconds off cooldown, no more than 20 seconds though. You want to be getting ready for your next ninjutsu to be a Suton so you can get this up ASAP. One of our major off global cooldowns is Assassinate or Dream Within a Dream. It's Assassinate at level 40, and once you get to level 56, Assassinate becomes Dream Within a Dream. This ability is on a 1-minute cooldown, so that completely aligns with Trick Attack. This means that you want to be using your Dream Within a Dream within the Trick Attack window for increased potency. Additionally, once you hit level 86, you'll be granted access to Hollow Nozuchi, and this is an additional AoE effect that your Doton will execute every time you do a Haki Ninjutsu, a Katon, a Goka Miyaku, or a Phantom Kamatachi. So this isn't something you really need to think about. I don't think about it personally. As long as you're getting your Doton up and you're AoEing like you're supposed to be doing, then this is just going to be giving you some extra damage on top of your standard AoE rotation, as long as all the enemies are within that Doton effect. Once you reach level 90, you'll be granted access to Forked Raiju and Fleeting Raiju. These both do the exact same potency, and they both increase your Ninki gauge by 5. The difference is Fleeting Raiju is just a standard melee attack, while Forked Raiju is a gap closer with a 20 yalm radius. Now, if you need to close the gap, of course you would use a Forked Raiju. If you don't need to close the gap, then use a Fleeting Raiju, but it really doesn't matter if you accidentally were to press a Forked Raiju, because they do the same potency. The only difference is Forked Raiju has a slight animation lock, but it's barely noticeable, so if you did manage to use Forked Raiju right next to the boss, it wouldn't really make any difference, unless you really needed to dodge an AoE the moment you used the ability. So just be wary of that. Now, how do we use this ability? We will be granted access to a stack of Raiju ready for each time we use a Raiton, and we can hold up to 3 stacks. The catch is if we were to use any standard GCD action, so that is our single target or AoE GCDs, this would get rid of the Raiju ready buff on us and would no longer grant us access to Fleeting or Forked Raiju. So when you are using a Raiton, make sure that you are either using one of the Raijus or another ninjutsu straight after, because you can hold up to 3 stacks of this, but if you were to use a standard GCD action after using a Raiton and ignoring your Raiju, you will lose the effect of Raiju ready, and that is 560 potency that you are missing out on, which is quite significant. Now let's finish off with some utility actions. First, we have Ninja's standard gap closer, which is Tsukuchi. This is on a 60-second cooldown, and we have 2 charges of this. This is a ground targeting ability so we can choose exactly where we want to go. If you haven't already, I would highly suggest going into character configuration, going to target, going down to ground targeting settings, and limit ring movement to targeting range when using this ability. It can be a real pain to place if you do not have this, because if you exceed the 20 yarn radius of Sakuchi, this will just not get the ability off, and that can be extremely inconvenient when you want to get to a place on the map as quickly as possible. So make sure to turn that setting on if you haven't already. There is literally no drawback to having this setting on. Next, we have Shade Shift, which is on a 2-minute cooldown, and it's going to grant us a shield, which is going to nullify damage of up to 20% of our maximum HP. So a really nifty survivability tool here. If you ever take damage you weren't supposed to, get a vulnerability stack or whatever, and an AoE is going out, maybe opt in to use a Shade Shift. Also, in certain raid situations, your healers will call for you to use your survivability actions, so that includes Shade Shift. Finally, let's go over the cross roll actions. We have Second Wind, which is on a 2-minute cooldown, and this is a simple heal on ourselves. So this is an additional survivability tool, so make sure to use this again, just like with Shade Shift. Maybe when we take unnecessary damage, get a vulnerability stack, an AoE is about to go out, and we need a quick heal, use Second Wind, it could save you. Then we have Leg Sweep. This is on a 40-second cooldown, and this stuns the target for 3 seconds. Usually I rely on the tank to stun, but if we need a backup stun, then melees have it. Also, if the tank doesn't stun a big AoE and a big trash pool, then you can opt in to stun that and keep your AoE combo rolling without having to disengage. Next, we have Bloodbath. This is on a 90-second cooldown, and just like Second Wind and Shade Shift, this is another survivability tool. This is going to last us 20 seconds, and for each physical attack that we use, it's going to convert that damage dealt into a portion of our HP. Then we have Feint. This is on a 90-second cooldown. It's going to lower the target's physical damage dealt by 10% and magical damage dealt by 5%. It's going to last 10 seconds. Because of the changes in Endwalker and this making the magical damage deal 5% less damage, this is incredibly imperative that you use this on raid wides and raid busters. Gone are the days where we use Feint for the tank's tank buster. With how tanks work in Endwalker, they have more than enough cooldowns to handle tank busters themselves. So use this on raid wides and raid busters pretty much exclusively, as this is going to really come in handy for your healers. Next, we have Arm's Length. This is on a 2-minute cooldown, and this is our anti-knockback prevention. If a knockback in a raid or trial instance is coming out, or even a dungeon, we can use Arm's Length, and it's going to not knock us back, and we can continue uptime on the boss. And then finally, we have True North. This is on a 45-second cooldown. We have 2 charges of this, and it lasts you 10 seconds. This is going to nullify all action direction requirements. So what that means is any positionals that we use during True North, we will not be penalized for missing a positional. We will get max potency for that positional. So for instance, if a boss was facing us and we couldn't get behind the boss because it had an AoE or anything behind it, then we could use True North, and then we could use our Alonian Edge, Trick Attack, or Armor Crush, and we would get the full potency of that, even though we're at the boss's front rather than the rear or the flank. Next, we have the opener, rotation, and reopener portion of the video. Finally, let's go over the stat priority on Ninja. So, like pretty much every single job on this game, critical hit is king. It is the best stat in the entire game, and you should be prioritizing it above everything else. There is no skill speed threshold on Ninja, so prioritize critical hit above everything. After that is between determination and direct hit. I believe determination is slightly stronger, but you do want a healthy balance between the two. So have a little bit more determination than direct hit, but do make sure that you do have some direct hit and you are keeping a healthy balance between the two with a favor towards determination. And then finally, it's skill speed. You really want to avoid skill speed as much as possible on a Ninja. It is completely unnecessary with how Huton works and everything else along with Ninja. You do not want to be faster than you already are. There's absolutely no need for it from my understanding. So to summarize, critical hit, determination, direct hit, and finally skill speed. And that, my friends, will just about wrap up the Ninja guide. I hope it proved informational to you, and I hope it was worth the wait with how Ninja was changed in the most recent 6.1 patch. I had to wait out a little bit before making this guide, but all the research, crafting the opener, rotation, and reopener aside, this was an incredibly enjoyable guide to make. I actually really do enjoy my time with Ninja. I want to get into it a little bit more than I have been. I've currently been maining Samurai when it comes to my melee DPS, but I think I want to actually play a bit more Ninja because I really do enjoy the job. It is a very high APM job in a sense, with how incredibly fast it builds the Ninki gauge and how you have to just keep on top of that resource and make sure that you're not overcapping it. But I really do enjoy this job. It's a really fun job. It has its own damage, which is insane, and it also brings a lot of raid damage as well. So if you are after being a supportive melee DPS that also can deal a respectably high amount of damage by itself, then Ninja is definitely the way to go. I will definitely be playing it more myself moving forward. Anyway, that will just about wrap up the video. If you did like it, please do give it a thumbs up. That really does help a bunch and motivates me to make more of these videos. If you aren't subscribed yet and you enjoy the content, then please do consider hitting subscribe, as that also really does help me a bunch. And if you have any feedback on this guide, anything whatsoever, or maybe just let me know how you find Ninja, then let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you'd like to support me any further, there are a few social links in the description below. There's a Twitter, a Twitch, and a Discord, and I would love it if you could check any of those out. With all that said and done, I will see you guys in the next one. So until then, my friends, take it easy, stay safe, we out, goodbye.